so low that you feel the only way to deal with it is to end it all. Sadly, it's happening a lot more than we'd like in the Bahamas. There's been a reported alarming increase in actual attempted suicides and people who've successfully committed suicide. Tuesday, the 10th of September, was Orange Alert Day, a day designed to bring awareness and prevention measures to the whole issue of suicide, changing the narrative. And we're here with the psychiatrist from Sandilands Rehabilitation Center, Dr. Petra Forbes. Welcome to Read Between the Lines.
Thank you for having me.
We're glad you're here. I hate to start off like this, but as we talk about prevention on suicide, we're hearing today that a 47-year-old man from Abaco tried to kill himself. They found him in waters between Marsh Harbor and Guana Key, and some passersby on a ferry actually pulled him out of the water. How many cases are you seeing personally of people who are all of a sudden finding themselves in a lost space?
So this topic is very timely as it is Suicide Awareness Month. And with Abaco, it's not surprising to hear that it's actually Abaco because they experienced Hurricane Dorian.
And there's still the fallback.
And there's still the fallback and the fallout. And we're going to get into the risk factors, but you mentioned that he was a man. And men are a higher risk for completing suicide. Did they mention his age?
He was 47. I think the police report said that he may have had a history of mental illness.
Okay, so that's three factors already. Being a man, his age, older than 45 years old, and a history of mental illness as well, and previous trauma or stressors. So if he's living in Abaco, he may have experienced loss of loved ones, loss of property, financial hardships. And those stressors actually contribute to feeling depressed and ultimately alcohol or substance abuse and suicide.
And of course, substance abuse and alcohol sort of give it a sort of jump start. If you're already teetering, it'll make it worse.
It will. So persons who abuse substances, alcohol is what they speak about a lot because it's legal. But there are illegal substances as well. There is a 45% correlation with alcohol and substance use and suicide.
Wow. You say men more. Why men? Do you have any information that tells you why it's men, or is it?
I do, and I'm happy that you asked because a lot of times men neglect their physical and their mental health until it's too late. And regarding men, they complete suicide more because they use more lethal means. So if a man is to attempt suicide, he may use a gun, he may hang himself, jump off of a bridge, versus a female who would swallow pills or slit her wrists, which allows time for life-saving measures. But if you hang yourself or you shoot yourself in the head, the window is much smaller for intervention. So men are higher because they use more lethal means.
Wow. And the age factor, I guess in a situation like that, if you've lost everything, trying to start over again is a challenge in any event. And I guess some people just don't have the strength to do it, right?
So we're going to come back to the word strength, but addressing age itself, research worldwide has shown that suicide is highest in 19 or less, or 45 or older. So that gentleman from Abaco, he actually falls into the high-risk group.
So the 19 or less, those are factors you think like stress in school, bullying, that kind of thing?
So in working in the Community Counseling and Assessment Center here in New Providence, and that's the public psychiatry clinic for our country, a lot of the adolescents who come in for self-harm or suicidal thoughts have been bullied. or experience some traumatic event such as rape, incest, loss of a loved one, but bullying has increased and it's heavily associated with self-harm and suicidal thoughts in our adolescent population.
Talking about self-harm, and I haven't heard much about it lately, but you hear a lot about young girls cutting themselves.
Right.
Do you see much of that in the Bahamas? Do you see any of it in the Bahamas?
We do see some of it in the Bahamas, and it has actually increased. And there is a difference between suicidal thoughts and self-harm. And if you see your kid cutting themselves, you're going to be alarmed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to die. So what occurs with self-harm is that your internal pain, your internal distress is so intense, you want to, sorry.
Oh, I really edited that out.
So your internal pain or your internal distress is so intense, you want to distract your mind from that internal pain. So what better way to do that than to cause physical pain? Because if you're physically hurting, it distracts yourself from the emotional pain.
I'm shocked that makes so much sense, but it does.
So that's why cutting occurs. Cutting occurs to induce physical pain to distract you from the internal pain.
Are you finding men, I've never heard about boys cutting themselves, but do boys cut themselves?
It is less than the female population. So in terms of self-harm or attempted suicide, females are much more higher than men. So it is higher in the females, but you do have one or two males who carry out the self-harm.
Now, a lot of people, and I will not use the C word, but a lot of people believe that if you get to the point that you are ready to take your life or you're contemplating it, that you must have something lacking mentally. That's not necessarily true, is it? Excellent
question, and I'm so happy that you asked that. It is not true. It's actually a myth. So all persons who commit or complete suicide do not have a previous psychiatric or mental health issues.
Really?
Sometimes things come up in all of our lives, and that's why suicide is not so far off or unique to any individual or to any family. It can happen to anyone. It can happen to myself. It can happen to you as well. Because at any time in our lives, we can experience severe hardships, breakups, divorce, the loss of a child, a loss of a loved one. You can lose your job, your financial status. You can get a chronic illness that you didn't expect, like cancer. It can rock your world. And just like we all have different pain tolerance, right? I can have a toothache and take 2 pills and go throughout the day. But if a man has a toothache, it's the end all and be all. I'm just kidding. But everyone has different pain tolerances. And the same is for emotional tolerance, right? Someone can get divorced. They can lose their home, begin renting, and they have such a strong social support. Their religious community is backing them. They get through it with ease. But other persons, they're more isolated. They don't have that strong social support, so everything weighs down on them.
We're living in such a volatile society right now. Some people figure, I don't know if I could talk about anything personal to people out there because they may go and share it with other people, and I don't need that. And so you try to figure it out for yourself. Are there for people who think that they know themselves,
right,
and understand themselves, are there signs that they could see that would say, hey, I'm heading down the wrong path now, and I need to go find somebody who could really help me out of this?
You ask the best questions. So yes, that does exist. And what I want to stress to the Bahamas is mental health and physical health, they work together, right? And if you have a headache or chest pain and you know you have a family history of high blood pressure, you're going to get medical attention. So if you know you have a family history of schizophrenia, you know you have a family history of depression or bipolar disorder, and you notice that you're not sleeping at all, right? Or you're sleeping too much. You notice that I haven't been attending Rotary. I haven't been attending my church socials or groups, and that's something that I have become withdrawn. I'm falling behind in work on my tasks. These are tangible things that you can actually see that is changing in your life, right? And if you know, just like high blood pressure, you know my family has that history, and I'm having a headache, I'm having chest pain. I know my mother struggled with depression. I know we have a family history of mental illness, and I am seeing these tangible things change in my life. It's time to get help.
Where are we as far as stigma of coming to wonderful people like you? Really, because you said, I mean, what do they say? Healthy mind, healthy body, right?
Yeah.
So they all go in between.
We're mind,
So
body,
really,
and spirit.
Really, exactly, the spirit part too. All of these things have to come together. So really, like, and again, this is a bad thing about men, because men don't always go to get that physical checkup every year.
Right, right. So imagine mental health checkups, right?
How do we reduce the stigma of, first of all, I mean, because I'm basically getting at, we should really all have access to a professional like yourself, and perhaps check ourselves out, particularly as we get older every year, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. So in terms of stigma, unfortunately, but the silver lining of Hurricane Dorian, it has sensitized us to the mental health impacts that people go through from trauma and loss. Grand Bahama and Abaco was devastated. And you would have to be living under a rock not to expect those persons to be struggling. So when Hurricane Dorian occurred, it was a massive initiative by the government to have mental health support in the community clinic, like the Foxhill Community Clinic where I worked. The Kendall G. Isaacs gym was turned into housing.
That's right.
And they also had a mental health support station there as well. So with Hurricane Dorian and us being empathetic and understanding the plight of our fellow Bahamians, I think the stigma kind of went down somewhat. And then COVID-19 occurred, and the isolation of the elderly. I used to go to see my Grammy every Sunday, like clockwork, right? And that's something she looked forward to. So you found that the elderly people, they were more isolated and depressed. Also, the anxiety of not knowing what was going on, the irresponsible media causing the fear mongering. People were having panic attacks, anxiety attacks. So I think with Hurricane Dorian followed by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Bahamas is moving in the right direction. The stigma has been reduced significantly. Is there room for growth and improvement? Yes, but we are moving in the right direction.
How young should you be before you start going to see a mental health professional? I mean,
You are my...
children have a lot of stress these days.
Yes, they do.
All right, for whatever reason. And then, of course, even though internet and social media are very good tools, they can be very rough tools as well. So really, how early should you start?
You are my new favorite interviewer. Like, you're asking so many questions that I'm really genuinely passionate about.
Thank you. And
Bahamas Prime Minister MPs, the all of the agencies that are watching this show and listening to the sound of my voice. We should start mental health screening from the primary school level. Just like we make it mandatory for these children to have vaccinations, to have a physical examination presented to the school before being accepted, mental health screening should also be mandatory. I also believe that beginning in the 4th or 5th grade, where kids get a better understanding of society and life, yes, Columbus is important, but conflict resolution is important. Learning about mental health and the signs are also important. And I think these courses should be integrated at the primary school level, at the age where they can grasp and understand, because there are life skills that they can carry through and become better whole individuals.
So really, we just have to find a way to make this a normal thing.
Yes, and then that also reduces stigma, because my child isn't crazy because I'm taking them to get mental health evaluation. It's mandatory by the government. And the earlier you find the signs and symptoms, the earlier you can intervene and prevent the bad side effects where you see people committing suicide, where you see the one-off person attacking another individual for being homeless and on the streets because they have mental health challenges. So we have the power to change it. Physical health is no more important than mental health. And if we're serious about having holistically healthy youth, yes, they have to get their physical health screening, but we should also make mental health screening mandatory. And if you need help organizing it, you have Sandilands, you have many professionals who are passionate about it, who are trained, who can help implement this plan.
The interesting thing is, and I'm speaking out of, I've just never heard of it. If you go to any clinic, say a walk-in clinic,
Right.
is there a psychiatric component in these places? Or like most clinics you go to, there's not a psychiatrist resident or on board, is there?
Listen, you are my new favorite interviewer. So the WHO and the CDC, to reduce stigma around the world, they are moving away from strictly mental health and psychiatric hospitals or clinics or facilities, and they're offering the service in general clinics. So ideally, PMH should have a psychiatric ward, because you don't want there to be a stigma of just going to Sandilands Rehabilitation Center, ideally. So if you go to the walk-in clinic, there should be a psychiatric arm there, as well as the physical health arm, so that no one knows what you're going to the clinic for. You can be going there for physical health, you can be going there for mental health. It's no one's concern once you get into the room. And that's how you reduce stigma. You stop separating, and everybody in the Bahamas is a small place, so you know if you go to this place, that's the crazy clinic or the psych clinic, right? So to take away that stigma, provide services in every physical health clinic. So I truly believe that the community clinics in New Providence, I think we have about 11 of them. Blueville Road, Elizabeth Estate, Fleming Street, South Beach Clinic, they all should have a psychiatric presence.
Are we seeing particular pockets in New Providence, because it's larger, where there's a little bit more of a challenge with the mental illness, or what is the best way to call it? It should be mental illness or mental instability. What should we?
Mental illness is fine. So some persons, so going back to suicide, like I said, anyone can experience mental distress. So you can have a traumatic or a life-changing thing happen in your life.
So other than Abaco and Grand Barbara, we're not seeing it necessarily by geography in heightened more places.
No, not specifically.
Okay, well that's good, I guess.
Yeah.
You spoke about some of the causes, but what are some of the other causes
For
people to get to the point where they might say, I can't handle this no more? And why don't, well, we know why people don't go, because of the stigma. But are there some other causes that could get people to that point where they feel that they might want to take their lives?
Yeah, so we have a lot of evidence-based medicine, and it's a science, just like physical health is a science. So in terms of suicide and the causes, being male, that we mentioned, you can't help how you're born, right? Your family history, right? So if your mom had breast cancer, your sister had breast cancer, there's a higher chance that you're going to have breast cancer as well, and you're going to be on the lookout and more aware of that. Mental illness is no different from physical health. So if your dad had substance abuse and schizophrenia, and you had a first cousin who also had the same thing, your chances are going to be higher as well.
So substance abuse is hereditary?
It is. There is a genetic component to addiction. Addiction has a genetic component, yes. So there's family history, your genetics. So female, male, women have a higher percentage of depression. So the genetic component, the substance abuse component. So there is a correlation between suicide and substance use, specifically alcohol, that has been researched, as well as mental health, right, or mental illness itself. You also have stressors, so it's a triad, your genetics, substance abuse, as well as stressors. Stresses can happen to anyone, and we list many of them. They have found that being widowed or divorced increases the likelihood of completing or attempting suicide, being imprisoned, having a mental illness, having a chronic illness, and mental health is no different from physical health. So not only having a mental illness increases the chance of suicide, having a chronic physical illness also increases your chance, and pain as well, increases your chance of attempting or completing suicide.
Well, okay, let's turn it a little bit now. You've got a good friend and you notice some changes. What should you be looking out for? Or what should make a bell ring to you saying, I'm not sure if he or she is really doing that well, and I should be afraid or concerned that perhaps they're thinking about trying to commit suicide. What are the symptoms?
So ask. Ask them.
Really?
Yes. It's also a myth that if you ask someone if they're thinking about killing themselves, you're going to push them over the edge. That is a myth, right? So if you are concerned, you know that individual, you know your friend, you have a good gut feeling or a sense of their norm and their abnormal behavior, right? So if you know that they're looking like they're having depression, and the signs of depression would be the withdrawal, not completing their tasks, changes in the sleep, the irritability, weight loss, weight gain, right? They're always complaining about pain. They're saying that, I don't think you guys would miss me if I was in here, or I don't know if life is really worth living anymore, or them telling you, I love you very much, and I want you to know that no matter what happens, that I truly love you and appreciate you. They're saying goodbye in a way, right? Ask them. Asking someone if they're thinking about wishing to be dead or suicide will not make them do it, right? And if you have that genuine relationship, and they may not tell you, they may minimize it, but they may tell you. And if they do tell you, then the action plan begins.
So, is there an issue of feeling not loved that comes or contributes to it?
Yes, there
So
is.
it is. Great. So by telling them, by asking them, you're showing them that you do care and love.
Yes,
So that could bring them back.
yes,
Even if they don't tell you right away. So
Yeah.
they come back the next day and said, you know, I was having those
Yeah.
kinds of thoughts.
continue to check in. So a part of the triad of depression is negative beliefs about yourself. One of them is I am unlovable. Another one is I am not worthy, right? No one cares about me. They are false beliefs that people who experience depression, and it's real to them. And if you withdraw and you isolate yourself, you reconfirm those false beliefs. So having a friend like you or myself showing up, checking in, asking if you're okay, it kind of refutes those false beliefs.
Wow. I think we touched on it a little bit, but you and someone on one of the talk shows was talking about it this week as well. All of these medications that tell you, say, you know, if you start having... No, but seriously, I mean, I don't mean to laugh either, but seriously, how much of an impact does that have on suicide, actual suicides, or attempts?
So in terms of the medication itself, I don't know, I mean, generally speaking, all of the medications that they say if you start to feel suicidal, in our brain, in everyone's brain, everyone that's watching, myself and my host, we have chemicals in our brain. And the main ones are, not to get all sciencey, are dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. And what those medications can do is alter the chemistry of those neurotransmitters. So just like having a blood pressure, we all know what universally the normal blood pressure is supposed to be. So we know if it's higher, you have high blood pressure. If it's lower, you have low blood pressure. The chemicals in the brain work the exact same way. There is a sweet spot, a normal level that they're supposed to be at. So if you're taking these medications and they send them too high or they send them too low, you start to have side effects. And that's where the suicidal thoughts come in. Yeah.
Dr. Forbes, I'm loving this conversation. We're going to have to take a quick break. We're speaking about how to prevent suicide and mental health really in general. It's crucial. Stay with us. We'll be right back.